Hey, it's Monica with It's Just Sewing, and today I'm going to share a little secret that you have to promise not to tell anybody. I'm going to share with you the top 11 reasons that people bring their sewing machines in to be repaired, and I'm going to give you troubleshooting tips and techniques to fix it on your own before taking it to the sewing machine repair shop. Hopefully it will save you money. At a minimum, it will be your first line of defense. So let's get started. Are you losing your thread out of the eye of the needle? Well, there are two really easy solutions to help you take care of this problem. The first one is always make sure that you have 3 to 4 extra inches running out the back of your sewing machine before each stitch line. That will ensure that you don't plunge your needle in and lose it right out of the eye of the needle, because you need those 3 to 4 extra inches to plunge into the machine and grab onto the bobbin thread. Number 2, change your needle. Sometimes these needles get a little nick in their eye and you can actually lose thread out of that eye. The other thing that can happen is needles, sometimes the eye will be really sharp and it can actually cut your thread, especially if you're working with a thread that isn't super strong. So just change out your needle, give yourself a little extra thread out the back, and you should be good to go. Are your threads and your fabric getting jammed underneath your machine, maybe causing a mess of thread underneath? It's likely that it's one of these 3 issues. The first one, your machine is not threaded correctly. If you don't get the thread in this take-up lever, that little hook that comes up and down using your hand wheel, if it's not nestled in there, when you start to sew, you're going to have a mess of thread and your machine is going to get jammed. Number 2 is, are you getting your fabric actually right on those feed dogs before you start sewing? Because if you're not nestling them, especially if it's a thick project, if you're not nestling them right on top of the feed dogs so that they're tracking through and actually running through, then you will also get a big mess or a jam. The third one, I always preach it, but dropping your presser foot. If you continually have an issue where your fabric isn't moving and you are starting to see a ball of thread and a needle jam, as well as your hand wheel won't move, the likelihood that you are not dropping your presser foot on a machine is very likely. So make sure you drop that presser foot, make sure you have it threaded correctly, and make sure those fabrics are nestled on the feed dog before you start sewing. Is your machine making a knocking noise that sounds a little bit like this every time you sew? Okay, so there's 2 reasons that this could be happening. Number 1 is you may need to look at your faceplate and make sure that it is screwed down tightly, okay? Any extra lift that it has might be causing a little funky noise. Second thing, and probably more likely, is that you haven't changed out your needle. And this is very common. Every 8 to 10 sewing hours you need to change that needle, and when you do, that noise will go away. Does your upper thread keep breaking on you? Oh, is that so frustrating? All right, so here's 4 reasons that might be happening to you. Number 1, bad thread. Thread breaks down over time and thread quality really does matter. So if you're having an issue with breaking your threads every time you go to sew, it's very likely that your thread is old or subpar and you need to throw it out and get better thread. Number 2, your needle. Maybe your needle isn't installed correctly, or you have a faulty needle. And if you have a faulty needle or it's installed incorrectly, just reinstall a new one. Number 3, threading of the machine. Perhaps you actually didn't thread your machine right. Take the time, rethread properly, and see if that doesn't help. And the 4th thing is thread tension. It's likely that your thread tension might be too tight, so loosen that top thread tension and see if that doesn't help the problem. Does your bobbin thread keep breaking? If so, it's probably one of these 3 issues. The first one, the bobbin's not put into the bobbin casing correctly, so take it out, reinsert it, and see if that helps. Number 2, you might have a knotty bobbin on your hands. If your bobbin is wound too tight, or it's uneven, or it's too full, and you put it into the bobbin casing, you're going to have problems. Number 3 is your bobbin tension. Now this is the tension in the bobbin casing, might be too tight. And I'm going to have a subsequent video attached to my blog post that will show you actually how to loosen your thread tension in your bobbin casing. And this is mainly if you have a front load, not a drop-in bobbin casing. So take a peek at that over at itsjustsewing.com or in my blog post below. Are you having an issue with your stitch line skipping stitches? If so, it's likely that it's one of two issues, okay? The first one is all about the needle. It is likely that if your needle is blunt because it's been used so many times that it needs to be replaced, or it's bent, or it's in incorrectly, you will have skip stitches in your stitch line. So first thing you should do is grab a brand new needle that's appropriate for your fabric and stick it in and make sure that it's in correctly and see if that doesn't help the situation. The second thing is more about if you have a vintage sewing machine. Vintage sewing machines typically have a little device that actually provides more pressure to your fabric so that it tracks on the feed dogs really beautifully. And if it's too light, the pressure is too light, then your fabric isn't going to go through and you're going to see skip stitches. So your little tiny dial will be up in this corner above where the needle is, and you can dial that to provide more pressure to your fabric. So hopefully those two issues will resolve it. If they didn't, it's likely that you have an issue with your timing and you may actually have to take it in to the sewing machine repairman. So don't shoot the messenger. That's just the reality. But hopefully the two techniques and tips that I gave you today will solve your problem. Does your needle keep breaking? All right, I have 3 different suggestions that might help you with this problem, assuming you have already changed out your needle, because as we talked about before, you need to make sure you have a brand new needle because they can break when they get dull. Number 1 is that you may be pulling your fabric out the back. This is a no-no for so many reasons, but you don't want to pull your fabric out faster than your machine wants to track it through. You can throw your machine off of its timing as well as break needles, and the timing thing is expensive to fix. So make sure you're not pulling your fabric out the back faster than the machine wants to go. Let the feed dogs do their job. Number 2 is you may not have the right needle for your project. Particularly if you're using fabrics that are really, really heavy, you need to have a needle that can stand up to the fabric that you're working on. So make sure you change out your needle to a canvas or a denim needle that is much more heavy duty. There's even leather needles if you're working on really, really heavy things like leather. Number 3 is you may be hitting metal, and if that's the case, it's likely that you have a front load sewing machine and you didn't put your parts back in correctly. So take them all out, put them back in, and slowly make sure that your needle is dipping down using your hand wheel and not hitting any metal, and do it for several rotations. Hopefully that will help. You might be having an issue where your machine isn't feeding through your fabric at all, and if that's the case, it's likely one of 3 things. There's a chance that your feed dogs got dropped. So there's a lever that can raise your feed dogs or lower it, so always make sure that your feed dog is in the higher position. Second thing is that you might have a situation where your stitch length got lowered down to about a 0 or right around a 0. If that's the case, bump it up to a 2.5 and see if that doesn't resolve the issue. The third thing goes back to having a vintage sewing machine, and that little device up here, it's a little knob that provides pressure, more or less pressure to the presser foot to lower down onto the feed dogs. And that just might be a little too light, and so you want to screw that down so it's providing more pressure onto the feed dogs to track it through. Hopefully those 3 things will resolve your problem. Are you starting to have an issue with your fabric puckering? There might be 2 reasons for that. So the first one might have everything to do with thread tension. If your thread tension is too tight on the top, you're going to see that kind of puckering effect as your fabric is going through. So you might want to loosen your thread tension up at the top. If that doesn't work, you may even need to loosen your thread tension in the bobbin casing down below. So try those 2 first. The next thing is, if you have really lightweight fabric, you may start seeing some puckering. So one way to avoid that is to put interfacing that is non-fusible or even tissue paper underneath the fabric as it's going through the machine, and that's going to provide some stability and security and a little bit more loft to stabilize the fabric as it shoots through. Are your stitches looking loose or even loopy? Well, if that's the case, then it's all about the thread tension. You want to go ahead and tighten your thread tension to make it a little bit tighter and a little less loose and loopy. Now start with the upper thread tension area, and if that doesn't work, you may need to get into your bobbin casing. That's a last resort, is to get into your bobbin casing to tighten the thread tension there. Is your machine sounding like it's running really heavy and really rough? Okay, so there's 3 reasons that this might be happening. The number 1 thing is it actually does need a good oiling, and that would be something that I would definitely suggest doing at least once a year, depending on how often you sew, once a year at a minimum. Second thing is you want to clean out your bobbin casing, the shuttle, all of that area, you know, clean that all out, get out all that debris, all that lint. That will help it run smoothly. And the third thing is take off your faceplate and clean in between those feed dogs. A lot of lint and dirt and debris can get stuck under there, and it's really, really thick and condensed, and it can cause a big issue when you're trying to sew. So once you do all 3 of those things, I think your machine will be purring like a kitten. So there you go, the top 11 reasons that people bring their sewing machines in to be serviced and how you can troubleshoot at home. I really hope you found it helpful, and I would love to know which tip or trick was most helpful for you, so please leave a comment in the comment section. Now, as always, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit us at itsjustsewing.com. Don't forget, you can always sign up for our newsletter too. I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day. Bye!